Somewhere in northeast Arizona, on a sandy plateau where the afternoon wind comes off the mesa hard, there is a small stand of corn that has never seen a hose. The ground around it is bone dry. The leaves have curled from the heat. The corn is alive. In a good year, that land gets maybe 6 to 10 inches of rain. The kernels were planted deep into the soil, sometimes 18 inches down, in small clusters the way the Hopi have planted corn for generations. No irrigation pipes, no fertilizer. Just the snow that fell in winter, the summer monsoon rains, and a way of farming the United States Department of Agriculture eventually called dry farming. You will not find these plants at the garden center. The seed industry pulled them off the shelf, 1 decade at a time, and replaced them with varieties that needed watering and varieties that shipped well in trucks. Some only survived because one family or one tribal nation refused to follow along. And honestly, that's part of why I wanted to make this video. Because a lot of these plants could still be grown in a backyard garden today, especially in hot summers, without needing nearly as much water as most people think. There are 20 plants on this list. Everyone produced food in the worst summers this country has had without anybody touching a faucet. There is a watermelon that grew 30 pounds on a thin rind. There is a bean that produces in 118-degree heat. And finally, there is a squash that stores for 2 years on a kitchen shelf. If your grandparents ever grew anything like this without watering it every day, let me know in the comments. Subscribe for the rest of the list, because number 1 is the one most of us forgot we used to know. Number 20 starts in the Sonoran Desert, with a bean smaller than your fingernail and older than the United States. Number 20 on this list is a bean, not a famous one, not the kind you see in grocery stores. Just a small bean, pale cream or mottled brown, smaller than the nail on your little finger. The Tohono O'odham people of southern Arizona and northern Mexico have grown it for thousands of years. They called it pawi. Later, the Spanish changed the word, and that is where the name we use today came from. Tepary. And honestly, when you first look at this bean, it does not seem like much, but it grows in places that barely seem livable. The Sonoran Desert, where the annual rainfall is around 3 inches a year and the summer temperatures reach 118 degrees. In 1912, a Norwegian explorer named Carl Lumholtz traveled through the Pinnacut region of Sonora and found small fields of tepary growing after the summer monsoon rains. No irrigation, no fertilizer, just beans planted in dry soil, waiting for the rain. The plant itself almost looks half dead at noon in August. The leaves tilt sideways to avoid the sun. The plant stays low and quiet. But while other beans burn up in the heat, tepary just keeps producing food. And here is the part that surprises most people. You can grow tepary beans in your own backyard today. They go in the ground in July with the summer rains, or in May with one early watering, and they harvest in October when the pods turn brown and crisp on the plant. A few heritage seed companies still sell the seed. For a long time, though, this bean almost disappeared. Around 1920, wells went in across the Tohono O'odham Nation, and communities moved closer to permanent water. The old monsoon farming traditions started to fade. By the 1970s, only a few families still had seeds stored away. An ethnobotanist named Gary Paul Nabhan started searching. An O'odham farmer named Ramona Button eventually found a handful of black teparies tucked away in an old family trunk. Between them and the seed-saving nonprofit he co-founded in 1983, the bean came back. This is something you will notice again and again in this video. A lot of these plants did not stop working. People just stopped growing them somewhere between the 1920s and the 1960s, when American farming shifted toward bigger harvests, shipping, irrigation, and supermarket shelves. Number 19 came dangerously close to disappearing too. A squash most Americans have never even heard of anymore. Number 19 on this list is the Hopi pale gray squash. Shaped like a football, it weighs anywhere from 7 to 20 pounds, with a rind a pale blue-gray that looks almost silver in the early morning light. The flesh is orange and dry, almost mealy. It is the kind of squash that bakes into a pie without needing a thickener. The Hopi grew this for centuries in the high desert without ever watering it. By the late 20th century, it was almost gone. One small family farm in Minnesota called Seed Treasures kept the seed alive in their pantry year after year and eventually started sharing it back out to other growers. That is the only reason we still have it. Number 18. Cowhorn okra. The pods curve like the namesake and grow long. It is one of the older southern okras, drought-tolerant by inheritance from its West African ancestors, and it stays tender on the plant longer than most. The kind of okra a Georgia grandparent would let go to 8 inches and slice for gumbo anyway, knowing it would not turn woody. Number 17 on this list is the Hopi red dye amaranth. 4 to 6 feet tall, with deep red stalks and drooping flower heads the color of dried blood. The Hopi grow it more for the dye than the grain. They use the red brack to color peaky bread, which they bake thin on a heated stone until it goes translucent and turns a deep, rich red. The seeds are also a grain, easy to pop like millet. Back in the 1500s, the Spanish tried to ban amaranth cultivation across the Americas because it was tied to indigenous ceremonies they wanted to suppress. The Hopi kept growing it anyway. Number 16. The Cherokee Trail of Tears bean. A pole bean with shiny black seeds and pods that turn purple late in the season. Carried in the pockets of Cherokee families during the forced removal of 1838 and 1839 from the Smoky Mountains all the way to what is now Oklahoma. 6,000 people died on that march. The bean made it. Generations later, in 1977, a Cherokee dentist from Hugo, Oklahoma, named John Weich, gave a handful of those seeds to the Seed Savers Exchange. His family had grown them every year for 140 years between the march and the day he handed them over. Number 15 is a cowpea most people have never heard of, the J.T. Harris clay pea. An African-American heirloom from the 1860s, stewarded by black families across the South, used for Hoppin' John and Sunday pots of greens for generations before commercial cowpeas pushed it out of the catalogs. The seed is the color of red clay, which is where the name came from. Number 14. Painted mountain corn, younger than the others on this list. In the late 1970s, a Montana farmer named Dave Christensen started gathering rare strains of Mandan and Northern Plains heirloom corn, mostly out of old mason jars, where the seed had been sitting for 20 years on the back shelves of homesteader families. He crossbred the hardiest ones for cold and drought at high elevation. The kernels come out in pinks, reds, yellows, blues, and bone whites, all on the same ear. Number 13 on this list is the Crowder pea. The seeds crowd up against each other in the pod, which is where the name came from, grown everywhere from East Texas to the Outer Banks. Drought-tolerant by family tradition rather than by formal breeding. Nobody ever ran a sprinkler on a Crowder pea because nobody had to. Number 12 takes us across the Atlantic on a ship most of us would rather not think about, and into a field somewhere in colonial South Carolina. Number 12 on this list is a grain. Most modern Americans only know it as a sweetener for biscuits, if they know it at all. Sorghum bicolor. In American history, it went by several names. Guinea corn, when it came from West Africa. Chicken corn, because the seed was good poultry feed. Tennessee rice in some Appalachian counties, broom corn in the Midwest. Most Americans never learn how this grain got here. Grain sorghum came to the American South in the colonial era in the holds of slave ships brought by enslaved Africans who had grown it in West Africa for generations. They knew it would feed them where European wheat would not. Ship captains and surgeons writing in their logs noted that the surplus sorghum brought aboard from Africa was what kept captives alive through the Middle Passage. James Madison once wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson describing what sounds very much like sorghum, calling it the true guinea corn from Jamaica, and noting that it formed a great proportion of the food of the enslaved people there. This plant is built for places corn cannot grow. Sorghum produces grain on about a third of the water corn needs. When drought hits, the plant does not die. It goes dormant. The rains come back, the plant comes back. The stalks grow tall enough that a grown person walking through a sorghum field cannot see over the top, and the seed heads come out heavy enough to feed a family. If you have ever wanted to try growing your own grain, sorghum is one of the easier ones to start with. It will produce in poor soil and high heat with very little water. The Carolina Gold Rice Foundation sells white African sorghum seed, and a number of other heritage seed companies offer both grain and sweet sorghum varieties. For a long time, though, this plant was almost erased from American kitchens. In the 1850s, a man named Lawrence Ray imported 15 high-sugar sorghum varieties from South Africa to South Carolina, and within a generation, Americans thought of sorghum as a syrup poured on biscuits rather than a grain that fed families. Then in the 20th century, federally subsidized corn took the feed market, and the African grain sorghums fell out of cultivation across the South. In 2018, the Carolina Gold Rice Foundation shipped white African sorghum seed back to Gullah farmers along the East Coast. The grain that had crossed the Atlantic on a slave ship came home by mail in small paper envelopes. Number 11. Hill Country Red Okra. Introduced commercially by the Southern Seed Company in 1954 out of the Texas Hill Country. Deep red pods, 4 to 6 inches, nutty in flavor. The plant tolerates heat the way the Texans who grew it tolerated heat, which is to say, it stays standing when nothing else does. Number 10 on this list is the Siva Lima bean, also called the Carolina Lima. Small, white, slightly flat. An 18th century southern heirloom, drought-tolerant by inheritance, with vines that climb 9 or 10 feet on a trellis. Thomas Jefferson grew them at Monticello. His enslaved gardeners harvested them. The bean never needed a hose. And here is a number worth sitting with. In 1983, the Rural Advancement Foundation International ran a study comparing the vegetable varieties sold by American seed houses in 1903 against what was still available 80 years later. About 93% of those 1903 varieties were no longer available. That is the scale of what got pushed off the shelf. Number 9. Mandan Bride Corn. A flour corn grown by the Mandan along the Missouri River alongside beans, sunflowers, and squash. The kernels come out in pink, red, yellow, blue-black, and pale white, all on the same cob. The story of how this corn almost vanished is one of the darker chapters on this list. In 1837, an American Fur Company steamboat brought smallpox up the Missouri River from St. Louis to the Mandan villages near Fort Clark. By October of that year, only about 138 Mandan people were still alive, out of a population of 2,000. The corn survived because the neighboring Arikara moved in, harvested the abandoned gardens, and the seed slowly dispersed from there to other families across the northern plains. Number 8. Glass gem corn, bred over decades by a part Cherokee farmer in Oklahoma, named Carl White Eagle Barnes, who isolated colored kernels from his ancestral corn lines until the ears looked like strings of glass beads in every color, translucent in sunlight. Before he died, Barnes handed the seed to a friend. The friend shared it with another grower. From there, the corn went around the world. Number 7 on this list is the Cushaw squash. Long-necked, green and white-striped, drought-tolerant. It came north from Mexico into the eastern woodlands of North America long before any Europeans set foot on the continent. Abraham Lincoln's family carried Cushaw seeds with them when they moved from Kentucky to Indiana, and then on to Illinois. The variety your great-grandparents probably called the long pumpkin. Somewhere along the way, the word garden stopped meaning what your dirt can grow and started meaning what you can keep alive with a hose. That shift did not happen all at once, and it did not happen by accident. The center pivot irrigation system, those great green circles you see from an airplane window a quarter-mile across, was patented by a farmer named Frank Ziebach in 1952. The center pivot did not invent watering. It made watering easier than not watering. American irrigated acreage went from under 3 million acres in 1890 to over 58 million by 2017. Somewhere in those decades, seed companies stopped breeding for soil and started breeding for water. Plants got thirstier because the country let them. The crops on this list were not banned. They were not burned. They were quietly pushed off the shelf, one catalog page at a time, by varieties that fit the new system better. The old varieties survived because somebody, somewhere, refused to follow along. Which brings us to a way of farming that ignored the new system for 2,000 years. Number 6 on this list is not a single plant. It is a way of growing them, and it might be the most remarkable thing on this entire list. The Hopi are a Native American tribe still living on the high desert mesas of northeastern Arizona. They are one of the Pueblo peoples. The oldest village on their land, Old Oribe, has been continuously occupied since around the year 1100, which makes it one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in what is now the United States. They are still there, on the same mesas, farming the same way their ancestors did. Somewhere up on those mesas, where the average rainfall is between 6 and 10 inches a year, a Hopi farmer goes out to his field with a planting stick. He digs 18 inches down. He drops 8 to 10 kernels into the hole, all at once, in a cluster. He covers them and moves on. He plants in bunches, not in rows. The bunches stand against the wind together and shade each other's roots. This is dry farming. The Hopi have done it for around 2,000 years. 2,000 years is a number that is hard to take in, but it is documented. The Arizona State Museum has the exhibition under the title, The Resiliency of Hopi Agriculture, 2,000 Years of Planting. The Hopi grow blue corn, white corn, red corn, and gray corn. 24 named varieties altogether, each one adapted to a slightly different soil pocket and a slightly different rainfall pattern on the same plateau. The kernels of Hopi blue corn are so dark they read black in low light. Bite into one and your teeth turn blue for the rest of the afternoon. There is no irrigation pipe in a Hopi field. There is no fertilizer bag. The kernels reach down 18 inches and find the moisture that is still there from the February snow and the July monsoon. The plants do the rest. Dr. Michael Kotutwa Johnson of the University of Arizona's Indigenous Resilience Center farms on the Little Colorado River Plateau and learned the method from his grandfather. In an interview with the Arizona State Museum, Johnson said this, "Hopi is the only place I know where corn has grown in such a way to conform to the environment. This is unlike Western agriculture, which continuously manipulates the environment to fit the corn." You can buy Hopi blue corn seed today from a handful of heritage seed companies. The variety will not grow exactly the way it does on the Hopi mesas, but the seed will grow in a backyard garden with very little water, and it will produce true blue cornmeal good for tortillas or cornbread. For a long stretch of the 20th century, this way of farming was almost written out of American agricultural education. Universities taught irrigation. Federal extension agents pushed hybrid corn that needed water the desert did not have. The Hopi kept planting their corn the same way they had always planted it. They did not lose the knowledge because they refused to lose it. 2,000 years is a long time to refuse. This is what the title of this video is about. Plants do not need a drop from the hose when somebody knows what they are doing and the seed knows where it is. The Hopi have been proving it on 6 to 10 inches of rain a year, on ground the maps call arid. 5 names left on this list. Then a number 1 your family probably grew without thinking twice about it. Number 5 on this list is the Bradford watermelon out of South Carolina. The story goes like this. Around 1840, a man named Nathaniel Napoleon Bradford in Sumter County crossed a watermelon brought home by a Revolutionary War prisoner with a local variety called the Mountain Sweet. The fruit he ended up with grew to 30 pounds. The flesh was bright red. The rind was thin enough you could cut it with a spoon. So sweet that 19th century farmers used to sit armed in their patches at night to keep thieves out. The last commercial crop of Bradford watermelons went in the ground in 1922. But the Bradford family kept growing them on their land in Sumter, quietly, for 8 generations, without irrigation and without chemicals, until in 2013, Nat Bradford finally brought the variety back to market. Number 4. The Sun Choke, Helianthus tuberosus, a perennial sunflower native to the eastern half of North America, whose tubers feed people and never asked for irrigation. The Hidatsa cultivated them along the Missouri River. In April of 1805, Sacagawea dug them out of mouse caches to feed the Lewis and Clark expedition in what is now North Dakota. Number 3 on this list is the Hopi orange squash. It is a cousin to the pale gray we already named. It has bright orange flesh, and it is ceremonially important to the Hopi. It is drought-tolerant after centuries of selection on the same plateau where the corn grows. Number 2. California Blackeye. Developed at the University of California from a cross of California Blackeye and Iron Cow Pea, and widely planted across the American South and West through the second half of the 20th century, descended directly from African cowpeas brought through the Atlantic slave trade. The drought tolerance is genetic. The plant did not learn it. The plant carried it. And that brings us to number 1, the whippoorwill cowpea. The seeds are small, brown, and speckled. The pattern on the seed coat looked to someone in the 1800s like the eggs of the whippoorwill bird, which is where the name came from. The vine sprawls. The pods hang in clusters. Cowpeas first came to America from Africa during the slave trade. Thomas Jefferson grew the whippoorwill variety in the South Orchard at Monticello between 1806 and 1810. By the early 20th century, surveys showed whippoorwill among the top 5 most popular cowpea varieties in every southern state. Your great-grandparents probably grew them without ever calling them by the name. Whippoorwill peas did not need water. They needed time, and somebody who knew when to leave the hose alone. 20 plants, none of them needing a hose. This whole list started on the assumption that an August without watering kills a garden. I used to make the same assumption. Most of us did. The hose comes out by June, the sprinkler runs at 6 in the morning, and somewhere in the back of our heads we have decided that this is what a garden takes. But 20 names just now say otherwise. A bean that fruits at 118 degrees. A squash that stores for 2 years on a kitchen shelf. A watermelon that has not seen an irrigation pipe in 8 generations. A corn the Hopi plant 18 inches deep, so the seed finds water that nobody else can find. Most of these plants were not lost. They got pushed sideways. The commercial seed industry moved on to varieties that needed watering, because watering had become the default, and a plant that needed less of it was harder to sell. Federal extension agents promoted hybrids, catalogs slimmed down. The old seed lived on in families and in tribal nations who refused to let it go. And somewhere in your family, somebody saved one of these, probably without making a big deal out of it. A jar on a pantry shelf, a paper envelope with handwriting and pencil on the front, a row at the back of the garden that belonged to a grandparent, and nobody ever questioned why they did not water it. Dry farming was not a fallback. It was the default until somebody decided the default should be something else. I want to know what your grandparents grew without watering. Drop the name of the variety in the comments. The strangest ones, the regional ones, the ones with names that only made sense in one county. I read every one.